Hello there. Given the number of undergraduates who've asked me about applying to graduate school, I think it's fair to say there's still a good deal of ambiguity in the application process. So I thought I'd take a moment to share some of my experiences with the application process and what I think are some of the key differences between a bachelor's level program application and a doctoral level program application. The first difference, and there will be two that I talk about, is that when you apply to a bachelor's degree, you're applying to the program, and then you get to take classes from the professors. Whereas with the doctoral level programs, and to some extent a master's program, you're applying to the professor, and you get to take classes from the program. This is why I think it's so important to apply to programs that share your research interest. That you wouldn't go to a computer science program to get a degree in music, and so in psychology you wouldn't go work for a professor who's interested in eating disorders to become an expert on researching personality disorders. They're in the same field, but they're distinct, they're different, and an expert in one will not be an expert in the other in most cases. And this leads me into the second way I think they're different, and it's in the intimacy of your relationship. So when I was an undergrad, I didn't have a single professor's phone number. As a master's student, I have multiple phone numbers, and that continues at the doctoral level. The relationship becomes much tighter and closer. There's a close-knit relationship among your cohort, at least at the schools that aren't hyper-competitive, and the faculty members, in that you're there for each other, you're looking out for each other as you seek to become an expert in your field, as you're being guided by these experts in their fields. And so that's why I think it's so important to be careful in selecting the programs you apply to, because not only do they need to share your research interests, but they need to share sort of enough personality issues that you can get along with them and work with them and for them for several years. I think that this really means that as you're applying, you need to figure out what degree you want. That's the first step. I wanted a PhD in clinical psychology. I was not interested in the PsyD, and I was not interested in a counseling PhD. Once I knew what degree I wanted, then I started looking at the different programs. I knew there were about 100, 150 different programs of clinical PhD in the States. And so, was I willing to look at all of those? Well, yes. So I looked through all the different possible programs for faculty members whose research interests lined up with my own. Because I can't test to see if we're a personality fit. I can just find, do they have the right research interest? I think it might be smarter to say, these are the places I'm willing to live, these are the places I won't live, and say, of the places I'm willing to live, what matches do I have? I think that's a good idea, and I probably could have saved some time doing it. But then you end up in the point where, well, I found 3 programs that match, but given that each of them admits 300 or receives 300 applications and only admits 4, 5, 6, 4 students a year, is it worth increasing my odds by saying, hey, I don't really want to live in Texas, although no one would really ever say that because Texas is awesome. But you end up inviting that conversation. So depending on the time you have, I would either start with places you're willing to live and then expand if you need to, or just look at everything like I did. So once I looked at everything and found that there were 10, 15 programs that had the right type of people, at that point, I dove deep into those programs and said, what are their deadlines? What are their admission requirements in terms of GPA, GRE scores? Do they require the psychology GRE? What are their stipends? I went through what can I find out about the professors? What research do they have? Do they have any grants? Kept going on to arm myself with as much information as I could because it's a big deal. It's a lot of money and it's a lot of time. There's a lot of opportunity cost in pursuing a PhD. And once I had that information, I created a spreadsheet and started ranking my programs of, well, my GRE scores came back and that knocks off programs 9 and 10 because my GRE scores were too low. And I don't think it's worth applying to programs that you don't meet the requirements for. I think there are a lot of cutoffs, and if you don't meet the GRE, GPA requirements, that they'll just cut you off without even really sending a real human to look at your application. And I mean, that makes sense. They're people who have research requirements and course loads, and are they really expected to go through the 15 to 30 applications that they receive for people who want to work with them? Why not just cut off the ones who don't meet requirements that would require more work on the professor's part to convince the graduate school to admit than the ones who meet all the requirements and might be smarter? You never know. So anyway, I ranked all my programs and said, these are the ones I would consider applying to. Then I started thinking, which ones do I have a good chance of getting into, and how much money do I have to spend on applications? And based on that, I said, well, I don't really want to live at this location, and I don't really want to spend $900 on PhD applications, so we'll knock this one off too because I don't think I have a great chance. And at this one, the professor only tangentially does what I want to do, so let's bring it down to 5 PhD programs. And then I thought, well, it'd be a good idea to have a backup program, and so that's where a master's program came in. I felt confident that I would be able to get into a master's program, having interacted with people at SFA before and having a good experience there, and thinking, well, if I don't get in, this is the best way I can go forward to prepare myself for the next cycle of PhD applications. And I think that's a reasonable path to choose in just about any field. And that's how I arrived at the 5 PhD programs and the 1 master's program I arrived at. I managed to receive rejection letters from all 5 PhD programs and got into the master's program. So here I am working on a master's degree. I just finished my first year, and I'm looking to prepare for PhD applications come December. So I hope that the outline of how I applied to, or rather how I decided which programs to apply to, has been helpful for you and might enable you to go through this a little bit quicker than what I went through and taking weeks to look at all these different programs and prepare a spreadsheet. I hope you'll let me know if this has been helpful down in the comments, or if you have any questions. Cheers.